I'm Adrian. I'm work on GNOME and GNOME OS and some other things. I work at Red Hat for my day job, and I'd like to share some of the kind of improvements we've made to GNOME in 49, and kind of more of a system level. So 49 is our latest release. It came out, I think, like 2 weeks ago, or it's really recent. And we made some pretty big architectural improvements. So I'll start with a very visible one, and this was us deprecating our X11 backend. This is a big step. I don't think other desktops have done this yet that have had X and have now moved on to Wayland. So let's start with this one, and then we can go. So what is actually happening? So in GNOME 49, X11 support is still there. It's just disabled by default at compile time. Distros have the option of turning it back on, but I actually don't know of any that have decided to do so. And then in GNOME 50, which will be released in March of 2026, we are basically free to start deleting code. And people are pretty excited about this. There's actually already merge requests to start doing this. And this has been, like, I mentioned Fedora 43 here and Ubuntu 25.10. There was coordination on our side with our distribution partners to make sure that we're not going to cause a problem with them. Like Fedora went through their whole FESCO process and got this changed, approved. Fedora 43 is on board with not having Xorg. Canonical went through and talked to their customers to make sure that their customers are actually okay with this change happening by 2604 is what Canonical is concerned about. So both distributions have went through, validated that this is something they want, and they agreed to it, and they have not reverted this. So it's pretty exciting. Why did we do this? I'm not going to go into details about X11 versus Wayland. I'm not actually a display server person. It's been discussed at length elsewhere. But just in general, maintaining two different display servers is hard, especially when most GNOME developers that I know don't use X11 anymore, and the code is slowly starting to bit rot. No one's really paying much attention to it anymore. The attitude's kind of like, well, this X11 bug will, if it's not super critical, it will go away when X11 does. So, no one's really paying that much attention to it anymore. NVIDIA was one of our big blockers for many years, but now we are actually in a pretty good state with their proprietary driver even. Stability-wise, that took a lot of work on the part of NVIDIA as well, and on upstream Wayland and GNOME communities. We have these special protocols like explicit sync and whatever to make NVIDIA's driver work correctly, and it does. It's a lot more stable. If you've used NVIDIA drivers with Wayland on Ubuntu 2404, the situation today is much better than it was then. We had a list of blockers that we've been following upstream in GNOME, and the last of these was addressed in GNOME 48, which was our previous release. That was the Orca, the screen reader, couldn't basically keylog and listen to key events because of Wayland's architecture. It doesn't let just random apps keylog your system, and we put in a special protocol for accessibility tools to be able to do that, because accessibility tools are not apps per se, so they should have access to do that kind of thing, and we have plumbed that in. And we're not actually necessarily leading the charge here. We're not going and doing this with no backup. Like Red Hat Enterprise Linux 10, actually, which has been released for a few months at this point, doesn't have Xorg at all. It's not packaged. GNOME will not ship with it. It's been removed. So having a larger kind of enterprise distro validate this for us, that they kind of went ahead and they have customers and so on, and support contracts. So if they're willing to put in the support for it, it's probably a good time for us to also do the same. So what are the benefits? Well, we removed the aforementioned merge requests, remove one part of Mutter's X11 support, and that was 27,000 lines of code, and about 7% of Mutter's code base that gets removed with that one merge request. And that's not even touching window management. That's just Mutter being able to run on Xorg, like as a just running on Xorg. There's also GDM, which is responsible for starting. I did a very quick and dirty estimate last night. I just saw the .c files that have that are like really legacy X11 stuff, and I just deleted them. So this is an underestimate, but again, 16% of the code base, about 5,000 lines, can go away. It's probably going to be more than that, realistically. And once we shrink down GDM, like we've been started having discussions about, well, what's left of it upstream, and really what's left of it is just some plumbing for PAM to make PAM nicer for GNOME Shell to consume, and it has this logic to run multiple PAM stacks at once, so you can like authenticate your fingerprint and your password simultaneously. Like GNOME does this. It's rather difficult to get right, so not everyone implements it like this. And like you'll notice, even like if you get a Polkit permission prompt, that won't do that because it's too complicated for Polkit to even do that simultaneous PAM thing. But if we move this infrastructure into systemd and have this standardized API to it, well, now other desktops can get this support easily. Polkit can call into this instead of doing its own authentication stack, and then you can actually reuse exactly the same UI in your desktop environment, or GNOME would do this on all the places where you're entering your password. So we can have fancy authentication methods, PIN codes, fingerprints, smart cards, whatever you want. And this would all work the same anywhere you would try to authenticate, as long as it's a GUI. And Mutter window management. I mentioned we haven't removed window management yet, and that's because of X11. Mutter is still an X11 window manager because X11 is an X11 server and it needs a window manager. So there are efforts to change this potentially. There's this project called X11 Satellite, which runs X11 with a special minimal window manager that does nothing but just export it as a fully normal Wayland window, like Mutter wouldn't even know it's X11. Like some of Mutter's developers are now looking into this to see if it's a way forward to actually remove more X11 code and kind of isolate X11 a little more from the Wayland stack. And overall, Mutter's window management has been really tied into X11. Like X11's cruft, essentially, has been blocking us from doing some window management changes we want. So if we kind of free this up to make it easier to refactor, then we can get things like mosaic tiling, which GNOME's design team kind of proposed a while ago as GNOME having a tiling window manager mode. And that's been blocked on this refactoring the window management. I'm guessing on this last one, I'm pretty sure someone told me at some point that the independent workspaces on different monitors is also blocked on like X11 stuff. Don't quote me on that though. I'm pretty sure, but I'm not certain. Okay, that's all on X11. Let's move on to GNOME Session. This one didn't get quite so much coverage, but I think it's probably just as important. So let's start with what GNOME Session actually used to do in like GNOME 48 and older. So it's kind of the init system for the GNOME desktop. It gets executed by the display manager, by GDM, and it lives for as long as your session's alive, and when it quits, GDM decides that your session is over and cleans up and like tells lognd to shut everything down, and you're done. And it actually has a built-in service manager, which was pretty wonky. It was designed around all these like non-standard extensions to your like XDG auto start. And XDG auto start was for just auto starting apps at login. Well, at some point we started auto starting things that weren't apps, and to control that we started adding a bunch of new settings that are not part of the desktop file spec. GNOME Session also handles XSMP, which is the X11 Session Manager Protocol, which is the X11 era session save restore. Basically, it coordinates like so apps can restore, like remember their positions and whatnot. It handles inhibitors. So if you're like if an app wants to keep the system from sleeping or from logging out, that's GNOME Session's responsibility. And if it needs to do whole system-wide like block shutdown or something, like it'll pass that into login-D. And it's the like de facto place an app goes to if it needs to shut down the system or something through a GNOME Session. Let's dig into this built-in service manager a little bit. It's quite bad. Essentially, there's an INI file that has this one setting called required components with a list of .desktop files. And this would be like GNOME shell.desktop, whatever, settings daemon.desktop, and like it would be a long list. It would be unreadable. We would generate it with Meson. And then each of these .desktop files just get started in order, and GNOME Session would try to manage them and make sure that they're running. For like ordering and dependencies, we would have these phases, and there's quite a few of them you can see. Some of them don't really make all that much sense nowadays, like Window Manager, Panel, and Desktop are kind of the same thing in the Wayland world now. The application phase, which is the default, doesn't actually exist in the code. Like the code just says if it's not one of the known phases, it's probably application. But all the apps assumed that it exists, so they wrote it exactly like that with that capitalization. So everyone used it anyway, even though it never existed. Auto start condition was another thing. It's kind of like systemd's conditions where the service either runs or not, except GNOME Session would actually monitor this condition. Like it would check to make sure if the condition becomes true, then the service is started. And if the condition becomes false, the service is stopped. This was quite a bit of code, and there was exactly one user, and it was the screen reader. It would check the setting. If the screen reader is on, it starts the screen reader. If it's off, it doesn't. That's all it did. But it was a generic interface for whatever reason. GNOME Session found out that services were running when they actually connected to the X11 Session Manager protocol, and would would basically register with it and find out if they have any state to restore and whatnot. And that would be the signal to GNOME Session that, hey, the service is running, which means that the service actually has to respond to query logout prompts. And like there's this whole protocol they have to play with to notify the system that it's running. And if they fail to do this, you would get this like completely useless, huge white error message that just said something went wrong with a big logout button. If you've ever experienced that, that's what happened, essentially. And your session keeps running because it's not actually a catastrophic issue for a service to fail and restart maybe, but GNOME Session didn't feel that way, so it popped up that error. And of course, we still need to be able to launch just normal apps that are not services, but that there was also some like difficulty there. So what's the fix for this? Systemd, of course. We already have a service manager, a much better one. And most of this, like the required components thing, that's just a systemd target with dependencies. All the phases for like ordering services to make sure they start in the right order, that's again just targets with ordering dependencies. Systemd supports this natively and much more flexibly. The phases themselves, they don't really exist on Wayland anymore. Like as I mentioned, there's no like separation. This whole XSMP thing, that's one write into a socket. You just say, hey, I'm ready, and that's it. Auto start condition was only used by the screen reader, so I just put together a service that literally only monitors that one setting and then starts Orca if the setting changes. And in general, services should now just have native systemd units instead of having desktop files that are not apps for whatever reason. So is this victory? Are we done? No. So GDM, when it starts the login screen, runs it through dbus run session, and then you will get that error. Essentially, the login screen actually doesn't have systemd in GDM 48. And the reason for that is we have this rule. It's imposed by systemd, but it's a quite reasonable rule that you only get one graphical session per user. And the reason for that is if you have two graphical sessions, they're going to be looking at the same files in the same home directory, and they'll be like writing over each other, and this will be a problem. And what GDM is doing is running this dbus run session basically forces GDM to break this rule, which starts a new dbus instance, which systemd is not listening on. So systemd doesn't exist in this universe that GDM puts itself into. And actually, we do run into these problems that about like files conflicting with each other. Like you could do a remote login over RDP, and on GDM 48, if you adjust the volume on any one of those sessions, the volume adjusts on all of them at once, simultaneously, because they are all technically kind of the same session, just with some dbus isolation. It was a hack. And the reason the hack exists is because we have RDP logins, we have potentially multiple seats, and we only had one GDM user, which means we needed to run multiple sessions under one user, which was, So the fix was to integrate with systemd userdb. And basically, we just copied the code that systemd has for its like dynamic user isolation setting. Like you could start a unit, and it will create a new user for that unit dynamically, and that user will exist for as long as the service runs. And when the service ends, the user stops existing. We defined a new range of UIDs for the login screen, and now the login screen can do this as well. Solves the problem. Every login screen runs under its own user. Every remote greeter, every remote desktop protocol connection runs its own user, and it just works, essentially. So now that we fixed that, we get systemd and the login screen working again, and now GNOME session only uses systemd, and we remove the built-in service manager, and so now. Okay, let's jump over to XSMP a little bit, and then I guess we'll say what the results of all of this were later. You'll note that XSMP was load-bearing before, but now it's not. So can we remove it? I said what it is. It uses some bespoke IPC system, by the way, called ICE. I don't think anything else uses it. It was supposed to make it work for non-X11 clients, which seems really forward-thinking, but I think it was more for services that just don't connect to a display to be able to use it. But KDE actually, as far as I understand, still uses XSMP even on Wayland because of this. But it doesn't work with like Flatpak, so it doesn't work right fully. But anyway, XSMP is terrible in some ways. Like the app actually gives it a command to run, and it will run the command at the right moment to do the restoration. It's like, anyway, let's not get into details on XSMP. We deleted XSMP support. It's gone. We also got rid of this. That's the big error dialog. That is also gone because there is now nothing that can cause it. And it also didn't work on Wayland ever anyway. It only works on X11. So what are the benefits? GNOME session lost 50% of its code. 8,000 lines of code. And now we can use systemd's features in our services. So for instance, Orca, our screen reader, now uses systemd watchdogs. So if for whatever reason the screen reader gets like stuck, frozen in a loop somewhere, and like I mean, this is a pretty catastrophic failure for someone who relies on a screen reader. They can't use their system anymore. Well, systemd detects this now, that I think it's 3 seconds. Like if Orca doesn't respond to systemd within 3 seconds, it will get automatically restarted by systemd. And we can start doing this kind of thing for other things. If your graphics driver crashes and GNOME Shell freezes up, well, maybe we can restart GNOME Shell. You'll lose your apps, but you lost your apps anyway. You just don't have to press and hold the power button anymore for the 10 seconds. So our services should start using these kinds of features for robustness. Systemd has really strong support for this, and GNOME Session Service Manager would often fail to restart apps even if they crash. So it's a world of difference in terms of like how robust the system is. And it also enabled removing XSMP, and all of this enabled me to start working on a new session save restore API that is compatible with Wayland and Flatpak. It goes through a Flatpak portal. This is all work in progress stuff. This is what I'm working on in my day job, really. So maybe we'll get some new cool features out of it in the end. So yeah, that was kind of the run through. And does anyone have any questions?
Do we have any more other questions?
So about the part with KDE and XSMP, I'm pretty sure we still have that around for X-Wayland apps in the Wayland session, but for pure Wayland apps, there's no XSMP involved.
Okay.
So now my actual question, how much pushback do you get from users who don't like Wayland or don't like systemd about all of this?
Wayland, I personally didn't hear all that much about. Jordan, sitting 2 seats over from you, might have heard more about that. About systemd, I was actually bracing for angrier response, and credit where credit's due. The people from the other init system communities were very graceful about all this. Like, I gave them a path forward to integrate all of this with other init systems. So GNOME Session doesn't really strongly depend on systemd. It just depends on an init system that is capable. So if you have one of those, you can do, you can replace all the systemd unit files. You can tell it to run a different command, and then, like, instead of talking to systemd over dbus, you have it talk to your init system over dbus, and that's it. I've talked to people from GUIX Shepherd and OpenRC, or for the Gentoo maintainer for GNOME on OpenRC. And OpenRC has an implementation that I think works now. It's not finalized, it's still kind of thrown together, but it does work. Like, there's a GNOME image with GNOME Session 49 on OpenRC, and GUIX Shepherd, I think, is the same. So it is possible to make it work. It takes some work, but everyone who had to do that work has been actually pretty nice to talk to. So.
Okay, that's very interesting, because in KDE we're pretty much in the same boat, in the sense that at least the Plasma developers really want to rely on Wayland, want to rely on systemd, but there's this vocal minority, or the question is how large the minority is of people who have concerns about that, and it's always a tough balance to address that properly.
Any other questions?
So about the Wayland part and the feedback, it's like, it's not about how much feedback it was, but the quality of it and where it was coming from. So like a lot of people had some genuine issues about like a couple of things that we were working on for 2 years to fix, until we went ahead and like, okay, yeah, we do no longer know of things that do not work or like workflows that might be impacted, and we are feeling confident we can go ahead with it. And there were a lot of people that just complained because they heard somebody say, like, I don't know, outdated or purposely misleading things. And those, you can only ignore them. Well, you can ignore them, and ideally you also want to yell at them so no more people start repeating the same useless bullshit, more or less. But yeah, it's always about if there is like something that's genuine, it's about the intention and the feedback you get, how it, the quality of it, more or less, not the volume of it.
I mean, we did actually have an issue in the GNOME session issue tracker about removing the X11 session, where we collected feedback and basically, are there any blockers? And we had this list of blockers that we addressed. Again, I mentioned the last one was this keyboard issue with the screen reader. So this was like kind of intentional process of, if anyone had something blocking, like I was really open to setting it back for a release or two or whatever. If there was like a legitimate issue that came up, it's just nothing came up. So I guess that means it's time.
So you mentioned using more systemd features for all the session services that run on GNOME's, the background services, I guess I would call them. But what about the applications themselves? Those also run as systemd services now, I think?
No, they run as, we put them in scopes. So we start them, like we fork them off, and then we move them into a scope, and that will come with resource limits, which we do integrate with somewhat. So like you can set memory limits on your apps and whatnot, and we do this to an extent. But it does not come with like supervisory features, like systemd is not going to restart the app if it crashes. Systemd isn't going to do watchdog monitoring on it to see if it froze, like things like that.
And is that something you would want, or is it something you would say?
Potentially, I mean, that would be a pretty deep architectural change in like glib. So maybe.
I mean, we in systemd we do have this XUG generator that turns desktop files into native systemd units, and I think that's what KDE uses.
Yes.
So,
yeah, but that's only for auto start. That's only for XGG auto start apps.
Is it? I thought it would. Like, I mean, in general, it should, like, a desktop file is a desktop file, right? Like, the question, if you auto start it and pull it into the initial transaction, is it separate from converting it?
It's a little more complicated than that, actually. Desktop files can also be dbus activated, and you actually don't. So anyway, there's some complex rules there about handling desktop files correctly. That's just how they evolved. So we don't actually use this in GNOME Session because the session save restore feature that I'm working on, it needs to not auto start all the apps when you're restoring a session, because you're not starting a new session, you're restoring an existing one. I don't think there's an easy way to do that. So for now, we just do it in GNOME Session directly. It's like a couple, like 5 lines of code or something. I'm sure there's a path forward to get more apps started via systemd. It's just that needs work still.
Are you planning to make GNOME more mobile friendly maybe? Or, I mean, for example, managing the lifecycle apps more strictly like Android does, for example?
There's kind of 2 directions for this. One is cgroup, which putting things into systemd gives us more access to that kind of thing. You know, systemd can freeze and thaw services, just native integration with that. So that kind of thing, just yes. The other direction is this session save restore thing. I'm designing it with the ability for the session manager to ask the app to save its state and then fully quit, with the idea that that can happen at any time for RAM or power reasons or whatever. It's just this like mechanism we have. If we need to use it, we can. But like I think C group freezer and C group memory limits and whatever are more of the path forward, but just having that fallback there is also useful, I think.
Would the session save restore give you a path forward to do a soft reboot without noticing that you're in or that without your desktop session disappearing?
That's my end goal here is for us to be able to like auto reboot GNOME OS during a maintenance window, and not for like it not to be noticeable because all the apps saved everything, restored everything. I mean that's a pipe dream. I understand because apps are not necessarily going to do the saving and restoring right. So I don't know if it will actually ever evolve to that point. We hope it might, but it's up to the app developers, really.
Any other questions? I was actually curious how that would work in a situation where you have some apps that support it and some that don't. Would it work almost like an inhibit with the apps that don't support it, and then you wouldn't be able to do the restart?
Yeah, I would assume so. All right.
Okay, well, thank you, Adrian.